is CORDIScovery. Hello and welcome to this episode of CORDIScovery with me, Abigail Acton. Obesity and being overweight is affecting children in the EU and worldwide at epidemic levels. In some countries, nearly 40% of children are impacted. An adolescent who is overweight has a high chance of becoming an obese adult, increasing their risk of a range of health-related problems from type 2 diabetes, hypertension and coronary disease to the impact on mental health of people and their quality of life. Policies aimed at reducing childhood obesity are challenging to implement, and compliance can be irregular. So would involving adolescents in the process of developing the policies that are designed to help them make a difference? The International Diabetes Federation projects the number of people in the EU with the condition will rise to over 72 million by 2050. One warning flag for type 2 diabetes is gestational diabetes, the most common pregnancy complication women experience. Once again, can involving the group concerned in the decision-making enable people to reduce their risk of maternal obesity? Making the right choices is easier when healthier alternatives to the foods which can have a negative impact on health are available. So have we really made full use of sweeteners? And if not, why not? What benefits might they offer? Being overweight and having diabetes are major health challenges that can not only impact someone's quality of life, but are also putting a very real strain on health services that are, in many countries, thinly stretched already. So what light can our three guests shine on these and other important questions? All three have been supported by EU research and innovation funding. So here to share some of their findings are Knut-Inge Klepp, Special Advisor at the Norwegian Institute of Public Health and Professor in Public Health Nutrition at the University of Oslo. He is interested in health promotion among children and adolescents and how to engage with young people in a way that makes a real difference. Welcome, Knut-Inge.
Thank you.
Sharleen O'Reilly is a registered dietitian and professor of human nutrition at the UniversityCollege Dublin in Ireland. Her research focuses on trying to improve women and children's health by preventing chronic diseases like heart disease or diabetes through behaviour change and health promotion. Hello, Sharleen. Welcome.
Welcome.
And then we have Jason Halford, a professor of psychology at the University of Leeds. Jason is interested in obesity, eating behaviour and appetite. He is on the board of the European Coalition for People Living with Obesity. Hi, Jason.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. I'm going to turn to Knut-Inge first. Co-Create aimed to reduce childhood obesity and its comorbidities by working with adolescents to create, inform and disseminate obesity preventative evidence-based policies. Knut-Inge, what was the thinking behind the project? What problem were you looking to resolve?
Well, we thought that we really should listen to the young people to see what they think are the good solutions. So we know that adolescent time period, the teenage year, is an incredible interesting period of human life where you go from being a child highly dependent on your parents and families to become an adult making your own more independent decisions. And you acquire a lot of habits that you might take with you for the rest of your life. So what was their perspective and what could we learn? I mean, after all, they are the experts on their own life and the environment they're living in.
Absolutely. Has this been done much before? Because I've not really heard of many studies that have been trying to bring in younger people into this kind of process.
There has been some work that dates back looking at, for example, peer education, but very often then the young people were asked to deliver a message that had been created by adults. So it is more recently that we really want to listen to see what is it the young people bring to the table, what are their perspectives.
Right, no, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about the way that you conducted this research. Where did the participating kids come from and how did the project reach out and involve them, please? What did you actually do practically?
Yeah, so we worked in 5 European countries, England, the Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, and Norway, countries that are quite different. But in all of the countries, we see that there is a social gradient in that we see difference in overweight and obesity rates depending on the socioeconomic background, the wealth and education of families. So we really wanted to include the variety of children from all kind of backgrounds. So one way of doing that was going through the schools located in different neighborhoods. But we also worked with the youth groups in Norway. For example, we have a youth organization named Press, which is the youth organization of Save the Children, an organization run by and for young people. In Portugal, they worked with the Scout movement and recruited young people from there. And then we sat down with the groups to see what did they think were the causes of unhealthy eating and inactivity in their local environment, identifying what we called other drivers of obesity then, but not focusing so much on the disease or overweight in itself, but more on eating and physical activity patterns.
Right, exactly. Kind of the causes that would perhaps lead down that path. As you say, the lifestyle choices that could be laid down at that age, which might then actually, benefit throughout the whole person's life. Were the kids enthusiastic? Did you find that they wanted to participate? I mean, I can imagine maybe initially a little shy, but did they get into it?
Yeah, they did get into it. But of course, we were the one who decided that we were going to focus on overweight and obesity because that's what we had gotten funding to work on. But this is something that engaged them quite a bit. One thing that came up that we hadn't thought so much about back when we started this work is the issue of mental health. That in all countries, that came up as one of the key elements that they wanted to discuss and thought that had a big impact on both eating habits of young people and engagement in physical activity. So that was really interesting to observe.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense once it's been pointed out, but it might not be the first thing you'd think of until it was pointed out. Yeah. No, it's an interesting insight, huh? And can you tell us some of the findings? In other words, did they come up with intriguing notions of how to do messaging or what might be effective? What did they tell you?
Yes. So as soon as they had decided, what did they think were the drivers or the causes, then so what is the solution? And we collected more than 100 really strong ideas that they came up with and were able to analyze that in different ways. But that ranged from, for example, having more healthy or even cheaper food in the school setting, being able to be physically active, having active transportation to and from school in a safe manner.
What sort of like safe bicycling?
Yeah, for example, and also walking. And also being able to engage in physical activity free of not having to pay after school because there are often high costs included in activity. But they also looked at more what we would call policy aspects at the national level. For example, how to reduce the digital marketing pressure that young people are experiencing.
I was wondering if maybe they'd raised that. Yeah. Sort of maybe what sort of advertising at certain times and not other times and stuff like that. Yeah. They must have all felt the pressure to buy stuff.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So we felt that they then both are pointing at the things that they could do themselves, but also being empowered in the way that they could argue for political changes. And we created dialogue tools then where they could sit down with adults that could represent businesses or other policy and decision makers and argue in favor of their proposals in a safe manner.
Oh, that's excellent. So it wasn't just a sort of theoretical concept. It was also giving them the voice, really. And did any of these little kind of meetings go ahead where they were sitting down and talking to people who could make changes?
Yes, we had quite a few of them. This happened during the pandemic. So when we had planned to do this all in a physical setting in a room, we had to do it more digitally.
Yeah, we all had to learn how to do that, huh?
Yeah. And it had some cost, but it also had some advantages in that we could bring together young people from different countries and different settings. So that made the discussions more richer than we had anticipated.
There also might have been a feeling of less pressure for the younger ones, not actually physically being in a room full of strange adults.
Yeah.
They might have felt more secure just chatting from their living rooms.
Yes, definitely. And at the same time, we really tried to set these dialogue forums up in such a way that there should be a majority of young people, that they should be able to present themselves in a way that made everyone start more on an equal footing. So it was safe for them to participate.
Excellent. That's really excellent. Thank you. What do you think is the key thing that you want to take away from this project? What's the one message that's most important?
Well, it is the importance of listening to young people. They are the experts on their own situation. And I think also we see in this changing world, the context that the young people grow up in is also changing extremely fast. So we can't just rely on previous experience. We have to talk to people here and now.
Yeah, have a rapid response. Yeah, excellent. If you were building on the work that you've done so far, what would be the thing that you would do next?
Maybe to be able to work in a local context and take it even further, to follow up with local politicians, not only in the planning phase and the conceptual phase that we did for a most part, but also to see, well, if implemented, what impact is this going to have? So to bring in the young voice in all aspects of the policy change process.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jason, you have a question or an observation?
Knut, it's really, really interesting data. And this idea of co-production, I think, is really elegant. I think you're one of the first projects I've seen to do this really well in the obesity space and focus on adolescents as well, who tend to fall between the stool of adults and child support. Did you get any feeling from the project about how supported adolescents living with obesity felt in their national healthcare systems, or how much blame or shame they felt, and whether that had an impact on how they engaged?
Yes, that's a really good question, Jason. As I said, mental health was such an important aspect. And of course, the stigma issue was kind of something that came up right away in these discussions. We did not particular work with children and adolescents that were obese, and we didn't ask them about their weight or didn't even observe it. We were kind of blinded to that. We wanted their concepts and focusing more on primary prevention. But it is clearly something that the young people are aware of.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much, Knut-Inge. That was really well explained. I'm going to turn to Sharleen now. Sharleen, Impact Diabetes B2B, which is Bump 2 Baby, aimed to identify those most at risk from developing gestational diabetes and to provide them with personalized coaching delivered via a smartphone app to empower the target group to make healthy decisions that would improve pregnancy and postpartum outcomes. So can you tell us a little bit about the risk of gestational diabetes and its impact, please, Sharleen?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose to make it feel a little bit more real, I'm going to kind of paint a picture.
Please do.
So let's imagine a woman, we'll call her Sarah. She's delighted. She's expecting her first baby. She's in her early 30s. And when she comes in for her first appointment, she's in the overweight category of her body mass index, which in essence is the average woman that attends maternity services across Ireland, England, the rest of Europe, and pretty much worldwide. But, Sarah doesn't actually realise that the pregnancy will actually tell her a little bit about her metabolism. So, pregnancy is like a stress test for future health. And so if a woman develops gestational diabetes during her pregnancy, it's not just about the blood sugars that she's going to have to manage during those sort of final few months. It's actually a signal that without further support, she's actually at a much greater chance, so about 1 in 2, of developing type 2 diabetes within the next 5 to 10 years. And it's the single strongest predictor we have within women of developing type 2 diabetes. So it's actually not just about Sarah, though. This is the point I wanted to raise. When you have a pregnancy affected by gestational diabetes, her child is growing up in her womb in an environment that has raised blood sugars. And what we know is that affects also the baby's metabolism. So it sort of pre-programs the baby to be at higher risk of developing obesity and also type 2 diabetes. So in essence, what we're seeing is a flow on of an event during life. And like as Knut was saying, it's another transformative period in someone's life to be pregnant. And we can see that the risk is being passed from generation to generation. And it's a really big global concern. So we know that about 1 in 8 women in Ireland experience gestational diabetes, but actually globally it's higher. So about 1 in 6. It's the most common complication a woman can experience while pregnant. And, that's going to affect loads of babies across the world.
Yeah, and on sort of an ongoing basis, absolutely,
Yeah.
perhaps even a lifetime basis. Yes, clearly very important. There must be work obviously being done already on the whole notion of trying to prevent gestational diabetes. But how did your project differ, your approach?
Yeah, well, I suppose one of the key things is that pregnancy offers us this incredible window of opportunity. It's a time when a woman is open to making changes to their health. They're in high contact with the health service, maybe for the first time in their lives. And they actually know that their changes are going to impact the health of their child. So they're invested in behaviour change. And so you probably are thinking, sure, isn't there loads of preventative things being offered to women during pregnancy anyway because of this fact? But actually, yes and no is the answer. So we know that they get excellent antenatal care in the countries in particular that we worked with. But what we also know is that the advice is generally non-specific. Clinics are dealing with large numbers of women and it's hard to provide. And so there's a gap with the traditional supports that are being provided in that they're not personalised. And it's typically, a relationship that's relatively short term. And so once the woman is discharged from the maternity services, it's a time that actually the mum might actually need the most help. And yet the service isn't there to support them at time. And, when you think about it, poor Sarah, she's at home, she's got a baby that she has to look after. She's exhausted. She's not sleeping. She's trying to recover from potentially a big event in terms of her health and giving birth. And then she's also trying to learn how to breastfeed. So it's a really hard time for a mum to actually, be told that, during pregnancy, they're at risk of developing this chronic disease. But they're in this chaotic period of their lives where there's a lot of demands being made of them and their health usually comes last.
Absolutely. You paint a very vivid picture there. I can just imagine that the temptation is simply to reach for the easiest food to hand because you just you don't have the bandwidth, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, totally. No, I see what you mean. So what did the project set out to do to try and turn that around? Tell me a little bit more about what you actually wanted to achieve and how it went.
Yeah, sort of three things differently, I suppose. The first was using a smartphone. And so women, we already know, are very high users. There's a high penetration of smartphones within this population. Women are already checking their phone several times a day. And so the support is going to them at a time when they want it. So if it was at 3 a.m., you're up trying to breastfeed, you can actually use a smartphone then, or maybe during your lunch break.
Who would you reach out to at that time? Would it be like your peer group or?
Yeah, well, actually the application, so Bump to Baby and Me, was able to allow the mum to either access a library of personalised resources, which included like mini videos and, plain language information sheets about the information that she might need at that time, or she could send a message to her health coach. So she would record a video message if she wanted to, and plenty of women did, or send a text message, full of emojis, like a crying face,
Oh dear. And I guess, did they have health coaches then? Was that someone who was on the other end of the message?
Yeah. So the women had health coaches that were trained healthcare professionals. We also upskilled them in their health coaching. And so it meant that you had a resource that you contacted and had live phone calls with through video. So not really phone calls, through the app. And they had them at scheduled times. So they had them at the start of the pregnancy and they had them in the postpartum period, when they were trying to find their feet in that window. As well as if the mum developed gestational diabetes, she had an additional video call to see if she had any concerns about how her goals might need to change with the advice that she was receiving within her healthcare system about her diabetes.
So then we're talking about something that was very much more personalised, more accessible, and I guess maybe in a way also very cost effective, because did you find that you could produce this kind of service for a reasonable amount?
Yeah. So in essence, we were able to scale out the coaching. So a coach had a number of women. So Leva Healthcare is the small to medium sized enterprise that supported the Bump to Baby and Me app, and they're based in Denmark and the UK. And so they, in essence, helped us through their platform that they've established and used within the NHS for providing health coaching, so that we had a trusted platform that the women could come into, and one health coach could manage around 150 mums.
Perfect. That sounds very efficient.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, they can work through their coaching sessions as they need to, but also provide asynchronous contacts. So the women were emailed back, like with videos from the health coach on, I can see you're working on this goal now. So, okay, have you thought about this? That's great that you sent me that picture of your dinner yesterday. You know, your plate should be roughly half vegetables, you know.
Yeah. So basically very, 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 very personalised, very much like having your hand held at a particularly difficult time. Sounds like excellent research. Well done. Superb. Does anyone have any observations or comments to make to Sharleen? Yes, Knut-Inge.
Yeah, thank you. This is really important and exciting work going on. I was just wondering if you see any potential for bringing these connecting these young women in any way to have them support each other, or also contribute to further your own research.
Yeah, absolutely. We did actually have a inbuilt forum so that the women could connect with one another. What we found, though, because the program in terms of the intervention ran over such a long period of time, so they're being coached for 18 months, and that's practically unheard of in the health coaching space. It's typically about 6 months. What we found was, because women were joining at different periods of time, creating those sort of vital connections that they would have with the peer-to-peer network was a little bit more tricky this time around, because we thought that they would connect more with one another. But what we found was, because there was women coming in at different points of their pregnancy, there wasn't that native connection in terms of we're all starting this at the same time. But we have been funded to do a new version of the project.
Oh, excellent.
Which is called Baby and Me Plus.
Excellent. Bravo you.
And yeah, so that project is also funded through the European Horizon partnerships, and we're using new countries. So we'll be delivering the app in 4 different languages this time, as opposed to 3 in English, 1 in Spanish. And the women will be coming through at the same time. So we think that the usage of that forum to peer-to-peer support is actually going to be improved this time around, because the women will be feeling like the women are more like them.
Yeah, it's more of a cohesive group.
We know that it's really important, because women learn best, as you said yourself, Knut, that they're their own experts, and they bring their own lived experience to each and every encounter that they have with a healthcare professional.
That's a really exciting development, Sharleen. Fabulous. Bravo. It's a compliment to your hard work so far. I'm going to turn to Jason now. Jason, identifying and addressing the barriers to the use of sweeteners was one of the aim of the SWEET project, along with examining the risks and the benefits of replacing sugar generally. So can you tell us what interested you about the role and the nature of sweeteners? Why do you feel they have an important role to play?
Well, we know that sugar has a role in the obesity problems that we're suffering in Europe, with many adults in Europe either living with obesity or living with overweight. We know it contributes to the high density of calories. We know that sugar in sweetened beverages does not impact on appetite, leading to overconsumption. And we also know that sugar is very rewarding. It's a very rewarding thing, again, driving overconsumption. And that's, for a long period of time, meant that many companies have looked to sweeteners as a way of replacing sugars, largely in drinks and beverages rather than foods, although increasingly in food applications as well. But I think there's still long-term uncertainties, really, and you can see a lot of concern both in the academic and research community, but also more broader in the public as well. Because while experimental studies and even long-term trials suggest that sweeteners, or at least certain sweeteners, can have benefits in terms of appetite control and weight management, there is a large body of observational and epidemiological data that suggests their consumption can be associated with obesity and adverse cardiometabolic effects. There's a problem there.
That's very interesting, Jason. Associated with obesity, could you be able to just very briefly explain what the connection might be? I mean, if that sounds counterintuitive somehow.
It does sound counterintuitive, and some people have argued the notion of reverse causality is the obesity is driving the sweetener consumption rather than the sweetener consumption driving the obesity.
Right.
And observational studies have a power of large numbers of people. They're great, and you can look across a population living in the real world, but a lot of it also relies on self-report measures as well, and dietary data, self-reported dietary data can be problematic. But there are ways around that. You can do urine tests for certain sweeteners. Not all sweeteners you can test for biologically, but there are ways around to addressing that sort of problem. So we were really interested in digging down on this, and we wanted to see whether actually replacing dietary struggle with the traditional and new low-calorie or no-calorie sweeteners, but also things called sweetener enhancers as well, could act as safe, effective tools to address obesity and its related pathologies. And we were also interested in the impact of switching from sugar to sweeteners in terms of environmental sustainability. Would there be benefits? Would it be detrimental? We had to model that on a life cycle basis with each of these ingredients that we were looking at against sugar.
It sounds a very in-depth and complex, but not in a bad way. I mean, intriguing project. Multi-strand. You were looking at lots of different things.
Fascinating.
If we consider two of those, because that's the time span, unfortunately, that we have. If we talk about safety and if we talk about public perception. So first of all, safety. I mean, like many people, I've heard sort of vague sort of rumours that some sweeteners might not be so good for you and so on. What did you find out with regards to the safety of using sweeteners?
I mean, we examined safety in everything we did. We had numerous studies, both acute and medium term, but we conducted a 1-year multi-centred trial across Europe, evaluating replacing sugar with low-calorie sweeteners versus just standard reduced sugar advice. And we looked at it in a weight loss and weight maintenance sort of paradigm. And we measured body weight, body fat mass and body fat mass distribution, gut microbiota composition, because there's been some issues around that and whether that changes the sweeteners produced are beneficial or not, cardiometabolic risk factors, blood glucose, insulin. And we looked also safety markers, including allergenicity. Which is interesting, we looked at food cravings and food preferences, because there is a belief in some circles, scientific circles, that actually sweeteners encourage the consumption of sweet flavours, which again would boost sugar consumption as well, so undo all their good work. And we also looked at adverse events such as GI symptoms and headaches. And
hang on a second, what is a GI symptom?
Gastrointestinal system. Some of these things are broken down in the gut, and that can cause some discomfort if you're moving or changing your diet as well.
And what sort of findings did you come up with?
Well, actually, in terms of using the sweeteners, they maintain more weight loss, about 7.2 kilograms, compared with the control, which was the advised group, which did actually manage to maintain 5.6 kilograms of 1 year. But the difference between those two are clinically significant and in the favour of sweeteners. And so replacing dietary sugar could be a safe and effective tool in terms of combating obesity and its pathologies. But also sweetener consumption per se did not negatively impact cardiometabolic health or cause harmful microbial gut patterns.
So we're saying that there was an idea that maybe sweeteners could damage the cardiometabolic health.
Yeah.
And in fact, it was shown that they didn't by your study. That's excellent. Okay. And if I was to move on to the public perception concept, because, you know, as a scientist, you can establish this, you can conduct research, but we all are coming from one fundamental point, which is that we have to get the members of the community that we're trying to help on board and motivated. So what did you find with regards to the public perception?
Well, I mean, there were some interesting results if you were nation by nation. There are very differing attitudes to both sweeteners, but also the credibility around scientific advice around sweeteners. Mm-hmm. Consumers don't always trust the scientific advice, and some hold it in higher regard than others. Some interesting gender and age-related splits, which were completely different in different countries as well. But we did find across the piece that consumers were looking for ways to reduce sugar intake, and they were considering sweeteners as a potential tool for weight management, particularly this idea of reducing their sugar cravings, which people found a big issue when switching from sugar to non-sugar products. But often, particularly I think because of experience or previous experience with some of the older products out there, the products were often considered less tasty or sweet than the sugar-sweetened counterparts. Sometimes that chemically taste as well associated with them. And that was a real barrier for the use, the consumer experience of swapping from sugar to sweeteners. And I think consumers had higher, more positive perceptions of plant-based or what they considered natural sweeteners.
Yes, I can imagine.
Could have been things like stevia, even though stevia is produced in a factory. It's perceived as natural, compared with what people would term artificial sweeteners. And that term artificial is again, a real barrier.
It's a huge turn-off. Yeah, it's a huge turn-off. Yeah, I mean, after all, stevia is a plant and sugar is a plant. So, hey, yeah. Thank you, Jason. That's very, very interesting. Fascinating research. Thank you. Does anyone have any observations to make to Jason? Yeah, Sharleen.
Yes, super research. I'm quite interested in the impact of sweeteners during pregnancy. So did you look at any of that? Because there is good evidence to say that different sweeteners have differential impacts on potential animal pregnancies. We don't have clear data from what I understand in children, but we can also see that there's sex-specific impacts, which is kind of weird, but very true for animal models. I don't know, did you see anything in your project, or was anybody looking at that?
We didn't. I think we weren't using pregnant women in. So I think that was one of the exclusion criteria. Although often we were recruiting families, because we also wanted to look at this in children. But it turned out we were also doing this in the pandemic, and it was hard enough to get the adults to come into the laboratory. And it obviously differed across the countries we were doing it. Things were particularly strict in the Netherlands and in Copenhagen, perhaps less strict in Greece. So there was differential things there. So we didn't look at that. And certainly, yes, these things are tested in models to look at their potential deleterious or dangerous effects, and they're not allowed in the market. That said, it's an important point that each of these things is a different chemical. So to bag them all together, I think often people just, sweeteners are sweeteners and it's all one thing. And there are very diverse amounts of these things, and newer ones are coming forward. It's very important that we keep on top of the testing for this.
Absolutely, because the market must be absolutely massive for this sort of thing. Listen, the three of you have been really interesting today, and I love the way that you're coming at it from slightly different angles, but basically we are just talking about empowerment here one way or another. So thank you very much for your research, and thank you for sharing your time with me this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye. If you've enjoyed this podcast, follow us on Spotify or Apple and check out the podcast homepage on the Cordis website. Subscribe to make sure the hottest research in EU-funded science isn't passing you by. And if you're enjoying listening, why not spread the word? We've talked about robotic harvesters so dexterous that they can pluck ripe grapes off vines without bruising, hydrogen-fueled aeroplanes, and cricket burgers. In our last 55 episodes, there will be something there to tweak your curiosity. Maybe you're involved in a project or would like to apply for funding. Take a look at the Cordis website to see what others are doing in your domain. So come and check out the research that's revealing what makes our world tick. We're always happy to hear from you. Drop us a line, editorial@cordis.europa.eu. Until next time.